Hello, everyone, and welcome to Impact 24 PR's Music for Film and Television panel. My name is Victoria Male. I'm a writer and producer, and I am so excited to be here today with an amazing group of composers to talk about their award contending projects. So please join me in welcoming our amazing panelists. We have Ace Vaptsarov from The Lost Weekend, A Love Story. We have Joy Ngiaw from WondLa. We have Lucas Lechowski from The Performance. We have
Hello.
Scott Stafford. Hi. We have Scott Stafford from Ultraman Rising, Stuart Hancock from Kensuke's Kingdom, and Tomás Barreiro from La Cocina. Hello, everyone. I'm so
Hi.
excited to talk about your diverse but all equally brilliant projects today.
Thank you.
Thank
Hi,
you.
Hi.
Hi. I know it's hard because we're all on Zoom in boxes. It's like but I'm gonna try to make that as little as possible today. I would love to kick off the discussion with a question for Joy. Can you tell us about your process for developing character themes before scoring WondLa? And then what was your process for crafting these themes? And then how did they evolve as the story took shape?
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for having me. WondLa was my third project working with Skydance Animation. And they are a team that really loves and focuses on themes. That becomes like a backbone of the story. So I was fortunate enough to actually being brought on really early, a year before the show started to score, I read the books. It was an original trilogy based on a children's book by Tony DiTerlizzi. Read the books, read the scripts, see concept art, production design, character design, and really able to spend that year to craft the themes with the team and make sure we had that foundation ready. So when the show started to score, we already had that. And I started with the show's main theme, which represents our main character, Eva 9. And each episode starts with that theme whenever the logo comes on. And from there, start crafting many character themes because WondLa is such a vast and diverse universe. Spending a lot of time seeing what culture inspired all these characters and so influenced the instrumentation. But overall, it's just a really fun and interactive, collaborative effort between the composer and the team to kind of make sure that we have a very cohesive and diverse score.
And then how did it evolve? Because we do all our homework as creators, and then when you're actually in the trenches, I know things tend to change.
Yeah, so the main core of what the showrunners, Bob Scanaway and Andrew Schmidt, wanted the score to be is both epic and intimate. So a lot of that comes from discussions and spotting sessions, which moments we want a very grand and epic moment to emphasize any action on screen, and which sections are more focused on the emotions of the characters. And that comes with a lot of things that a lot of composers here will know, like what instruments and orchestration, the pacing. It kind of just develops as the story goes, but the philosophy is it's always story comes first.
Love that. Kensuke's Kingdom, on the other hand, explores themes of survival, friendship, and self-discovery. So, Stuart, how did you approach crafting a musical palette that captures the emotional depth of a story that talks about these really big topics?
Well, similar to Joy, I came on board very early in the process. It was not quite as early as Joy, but it was at the animatic stage. And at that point, so it was just the line drawings edited to create an edit of sorts to work to. So you had temp voices, temp sound effects, and temp music. And the music, for a start, the story is set in the late 80s, but all the music was from the late 80s as well. So you had a ton of John Williams, which is right up my street. So, the directors and I are sort of an age to have properly grown up with those films, you know, your E.T.s and your Star Wars and your Indiana Jones. So bits of that are all in there. And so the palette in terms of sound and style was kind of set by the temp score. You know, I have absolutely no complaints about that because I love that music. But like Joy, Joy's WondLa score is a very theme-driven score, and it's also Kensuke's Kingdom is kind of a silent movie in a way, or at least three-quarters of it is pretty much a silent movie because the two lead characters, Kensuke and the boy Michael, don't speak a word of each other's language. So and they're the only two human characters basically in the rest of the film. So there's a lot of space for the music to do a lot of the storytelling and a lot of the heavy lifting of driving the emotion. So I mean the brilliant thing about this score for me was that it gave me a chance to basically create a symphony. Develop themes in a really coherent way, in a really, really satisfying way, which is sort of such a rarity in what we do today. And I hope that sort of scoring never goes out of fashion because it delivers the emotion right to the jugular, and I will never forget when it premiered at the Annecy Festival last year in the big 1,000-seat cinema. Whether you've seen it on the movie or not, but the final sequence is sort of a coming together. I won't give any spoilers, but the music surges to its final climax, and it's all the themes have come together in the sort of finale scene, and cut to black, you know, last big orchestra stab. The audience just erupted, like it's the cheer. I get goosebumps talking about it, but it just sort of made me realize that, you know, we've done our job. You know, the story's worked, the symphony, if you like, is sort of natural conclusion.
You did what you needed to do or what you set out to do. That's fantastic. Yeah. And I got chills just hearing that story. Thank you for sharing. On the other hand, going from Annecy, France to Mexico, La Cocina explores themes of family tradition and immigration. So, Tomás, how did you use music to convey the complex emotions of the characters and the challenges they face?
Well, it's a tricky one because you want your film to be universal. And just as Joy and Stuart were saying, emotion is the top priority. This movie as well, it's kind of a symphony, I would say, but rather than a musical symphony, perhaps an ensemble symphony. We have these amazing actors, Raúl Briones and Rooney Mara. We have these amazing cast, supporting cast. The music is important, and they listen to this song by Ramón Ayala, which is called A Fistful of Dirt, Un Puño de Tierra. And that's really, you know, a very traditional song it's kind of there all the time. But the score, Alonso, he is a really amazing director, and he's musical all the way. So he would give me the task to compose a choir in Welsh that represents a pirate ship, 19th century story like sea song. So he thinks the kitchen is the ship. So we have this chanting, we have this very dark and rough chanting of these guys in Welsh. And we have some strings with that. That was a very nice part of the score. And it's not Mexican whatsoever, but at the same time, I want to think that it's universal and you can send some colors there. And we had this counterpart of jazz music for the inside of the restaurant. And that represents this world of fantasy, of not reality, which is the inside of a restaurant. Everything is pretty, everything is beautiful. You don't have a clue what's happening behind doors. and these guys are prepping your food, and you don't know. So it was really interesting to make that film.
Yeah, what a contrast. It's almost a lesser composer would need two different people to do that, and it's so interesting to hear how you united both of them. Speaking of balancing acts, balancing high energy action scenes with emotional depth is essential in a project like Ultraman Rising and not easy to do. Scott, how did you ensure that music supported both the thrilling battles and the character-driven moments in your project?
Great question. I was fortunate to have worked with the writer and director Shannon Tyndall on many projects in the past, and we've become very, very close friends. And I know that he has this ability to shift on a dime between an intense action scene and then suddenly kind of making you feel like, oh my God, why do I suddenly feel so emotional about this character and about this scene? The main kaiju Gigantron has a very classic, massive sort of kaiju theme that moments after we hear it for the first time, we realize that it is a she is a mom who is dying to protect her child. And it just sort of, oh my God, I'm feeling emotions about this terrifying creature. And the same theme has to come back in that form and support both. So really relying heavily on orchestral instruments performed by human beings that are capable of doing things that computers can't. And by, really letting the story guide the emotions rather than the music. I feel like if the music is ever even a second ahead of the story, people feel manipulated. So when you're making these sudden emotional turns, people generally don't feel like, hey, I'm not ready to feel that. So just being really, really mindful of things like that and choosing a lot of themes that don't just exist by themselves, but interrelate. So in other words, the baby Emmy's theme is based on the family theme. The antagonist, Dr. Onda, is the family theme with one note altered to put it into a Japanese pentatonic scale called the In scale, making these tiny little adjustments to keep everything with this shared DNA. Having the main instrument be actually orchestral harp because of its ability of being very emotionally honest and upfront, but also by choosing to play de la table, which is close to the frame. The Western harp can sound like a Japanese koto, and then you can kind of play with those as well. So choosing this really kind of lean set of themes that are all interrelated and musicians that can go from terrifying to emotional in a second. And yeah, just basically that.
That's brilliant. That's such a brilliant insight on pacing as well, how you can't be ahead of the audience in your score. I've never thought of that. That's absolutely brilliant. Lucas, the heart of the performance lies in its dance sequences, and they're fantastic dance sequences. What was your approach to scoring these scenes, and did you find it challenging? I can imagine it's very challenging too, because there's a lot of tap in this movie. So how did the recording sessions come together?
Yeah, so it's a movie about the tap dancer. It's a period piece based in 1937. Yes, recording. I mean, writing first. Writing was quite challenging. The biggest challenge was, I mean, just the technical lining up with the tempo and making sure the energy of the piece is up there with it. The sound of when I was writing the piece, the sound of the tap, I treated this almost like a vocal would be in the song. So I was creating a space for the tap to have enough space, and I cut certain frequencies from the score, so make more room for it. So that was a challenge, and yeah, it was mostly written in like a jazz style, and the recording session was quite challenging because we wanted to only like as we write music for films, it has to be everything has to be like very precise and and wanting to have like jazz feel in it, it requires totally different mindset. So we were trying to balance, give the musicians as much freedom as they needed to be able to deliver that, but at the same time, we wanted to have the score to be really precise and hit certain moments in the score, in the dances, to highlight the work of the choreographer that worked on the pieces.
For sure. I feel like you pulled off something that almost broke Gene Kelly, because I know he choreographed Invitation to Dance and then and then scored it afterwards. And I know that I'm a film nerd. I know that almost like broke his team trying to score something to dance. So I bow down.
Yeah.
The Lost Weekend, a love story, explores a deeply personal and emotional love story. So, Ace, how did you use music to underscore the intimacy and complexity of the relationship portrayed in the film?
Absolutely. Yeah, such a fun challenge and such an incredible project. So off the bat, I was just so inspired. And as Joy said, I just started writing themes. So basically, it was mostly the themes that carried the different sort of emotional centers. But there's an interesting thing I was thinking about as you guys were talking about the specter of like how big can you get and how small can you get. And that can really affect no matter what your palette is, whether it's an orchestra or synths or sound design, going from like complete silence and just a solo instrument all the way up through the palette through like an entire orchestra. And for this project, we had a string orchestra and woodwind ensemble and guitars and synths and sound effects. We had like the big sound. So we would go through that specter whenever we need. We'll go big or small, and sometimes we have just solo guitar, maybe just strumming along quietly, or maybe like a solo flute here and there, or we get the big everyone blaring. Although here for this instance, it's a rock documentary, so we don't really have much like orchestral blaring, but we do have a lot of like hard rock music. But actually, I want to mention an interesting story. One of the things I learned on this project, I've heard other people talk about this, but this was the first time I experienced this. We were towards the end of the project, we were kind of screening the last cues. Everything was kind of done. And then that's the fifth act, that's the very end of the movie where May Pang, this movie is about May Pang and John Lennon's relationship, and Julian also comes in at the end, and they have like kind of like an intimate moment. And then we had music playing over this as they were sitting on the table and talking. We had music, and it was a beautiful cue. Everyone really approved it and loved it. But an interesting thing that happened was I realized we're missing something here by playing this moment with. It was soft, beautiful music, but by playing this moment, we're kind of missing part of the humanity. What would happen if we tried to take out the music in that cue, and so or that scene? And what happened was like it enhanced the scene like 3 times. We really could feel at the end this pause. They're together, they're talking, they hug, they share a couple of emotional moments, and without any music, we had such a bigger impact. And so I was like, so sometimes not having any music is actually a musical choice. So this was a good lesson, and everyone was like, "Yep, this is the correct way to go for this moment." And so, yeah, I think it's really funny that sometimes you have the whole palette of the specter of orchestra and sounds and effect. We work so hard, but then sometimes we shouldn't forget that this end of the specter is silence, and that's also a musical choice too. So, and a pretty important one and very effective one sometimes. Yeah.
Yes, that's absolutely brilliant and mind-blowing. I think, the lesserness of having that as a tool and using that as a tool effectively is no easy feat. I think that's such a brilliant anecdote to lead me into my next question, which is for everyone, if one or two of y'all want to jump in, because it talks about collaboration and also, as all of you brilliant composers have mentioned, you're serving the story. It isn't just you're not just writing music for the sake of writing music or to show your skill set and your passion for something. We're all, and again, me as a writer and a producer, we're all serving something bigger than ourselves. And usually the captain of that ship is the director if a production's doing what it should. How do you balance their vision with your own creative instincts to hopefully make something that's greater than the sum of its parts?
You keep communicating at all times. I think that's the crucial thing. And if you like each other and you enjoy each other's company, and you then keep communicating, that's the crucial thing, and be open to each other's ideas, respect each other's opinions. So it sounds obvious to say, but it's the communication, really, isn't it?
Yeah, it's harder in practice too, especially when you're like, these are my thought babies and these are my thought babies, and we have to make sure they play with each other well.
Yeah. Trust is the hardest thing, right? But it's the thing we all need the most. And you have to, as a composer, you have to trust the director. You have to trust in the process and know that really only the director has all of these different elements in mind and knows where the hockey puck is going to be rather than where it is. And that's something that a composer just can't do by themselves. So it's that conversation, it's that trust in the director and trust in the process.
I think like we're like a team, right? And so it's like if you're not listening to your team captain or your coach, like you're going to lose the game, or it's not going to come together cohesively. So that's a really interesting way to put it.
And I want to chime in here as well, because I've heard other directors that I've worked with struggle with other composers that they fired or left the project, that they've struggled with this. And my way around this is whenever there's like a difference in opinion, right? So maybe it's a theme or a specific couple of notes in the theme, and then it's really useful to just like have a couple of versions. And it's sometimes like, because you could get like all egotistic about it, be like, oh, but my version is so good, why would you want this? Let's do my version. But instead of having that mindset, just do great idea. Let's try this. And then if you still think that your idea is better or suits more the dynamic arc or whatever you're kind of working on, just give them both, or maybe 3 versions, 3, 4, 5 versions, maybe 10. I heard that James Newton Howard did 40 versions for one of his when he was demoing for Fantastic Beasts. So like 40 versions for a scene. Even having 2 or 3 may be great, but maybe more. And
I think 40 is officially too much.
Let it be known.
39, yeah, that's it.
It's fine, but not 40. Cross the line.
Right. So yeah, it's important to be flexible. That's what I'm saying. Even if there's a difference in opinion, just be good about it and do a couple versions. Yeah, don't get hung up on your version.
That's great advice, and that's great actionable advice, Ace. Thank you. So Stuart, heading back to you and Kensuke's Kingdom, given the project's connection to Japanese culture through the character of Kensuke, did you incorporate any specific cultural or traditional Japanese musical elements into the score? And if so, how did you balance them with the film's broader narrative?
The directors didn't want to become too geographical about it, because the story is told mostly through the eyes of the boy, who is English, who's washed up on the desert island where he's trying to make a new life with the old soldier, Kensuke, who's Japanese. So it was more injecting a bit of mystery and sense of the unknown into it without getting too specific geographically. But so I occasionally used a bit of bamboo flute and a bit of bass flute for a bit of sort of exoticness. Yeah. But as a whole, no, it stayed in the realms of a sort of Western-ish score. That is, except for one very pivotal scene in the middle of the film, where we get a flashback and we learn Kensuke's origin story. Which, if you've not seen it, he believes his family were died in Nagasaki. And he left to fight in the war, and his family, he got wind of the news of the bomb drop. And the animation flips into this beautiful kind of watery ink, Japanese style animation. So it's a complete shift in style. And it needed a shift in musical style as well. And we needed to be in Japan for that point, we needed to be very obviously in Japan. And I tried writing a little bit Japanesey, but it didn't wash. So I figured we had a choir that I was recording with. So, and up to that point in the score, they'd done more textural singing and vocalizing some wordless stuff. But it was time to give them a showpiece. So I'm not ashamed to say I Googled Japanese folk song, and up popped the song Sakura Sakura, which has been used in other games and films. But it's a beautiful kind of melancholy folk song, traditional folk song that Japanese people know very, very well. And I did quite an involved arrangement of that with just the choir. Lost the orchestra altogether. Wow. Just the choir, a London-based choir. So we had a dialect coach to help with the pronunciation, and managed to find an 8-year-old Japanese girl singer in London called Coco, and she delivered the first verse of Sakura Sakura, like, yeah.
Coco did the thing.
Solo Coco on verse 1, starring moment. Yeah, for that one scene of the movie, yeah, we're all Japan, but for either side of it, it's just little hints without getting too specific.
That's fantastic and wonderful how, again, you can create place, and sometimes you have to think outside the box to do that and challenge yourself and also humble yourself and Google. There's nothing wrong with admitting that you had to Google Japanese folk song.
Just the melody of that folk song, it's so sad, and it's going with a depiction in sort of watercolor ink animation of the destruction of Nagasaki, and it's like, oh my goodness me, this is, get me out of here. It's powerful stuff. Yeah.
Love it. I mean, love it. Love the art. Don't love Nagasaki, but love the how you're able to really deliver the poignance of that moment.
Yeah.
Tomás, La Cocina is deeply rooted in Mexican culture. So how did you incorporate traditional Mexican music, as you mentioned earlier, and instruments into your score while also creating that contemporary sound with all the different influences as well? I can't believe, I love that you pulled out the Welsh in this. I'm like, that, I wasn't expecting that.
Yeah, me neither. But this director, he's a genius. And at the same time, it's a very good question. Just as Stuart was saying, I mean, we're all trying to reach the audience, not to give, a folkloric color or whatsoever. Sometimes an American director would hire me to make this Mexican sound, which I love. But with Mexican directors, they ask me for universal emotions. We have this choir, we have strings with glissandi. We try to be, propositive, modern, contemporary, and perhaps universal. So, but yeah, I used some brass, for example, and I think without wanting, these brass, they have this crunchy, little out of tune Mexican sound. So that's always a nice balance to try and think about these different nuances in the borders, but also give us permission to be universal. I mean, American director makes this Japanese movie. Everyone is on for it. But Mexican composer, you need to sound Mexican. How so? Why is that? So it's an interesting phenomena, and as we can see in this panel, this is changing, and this is getting really a melting pot of richness and creativity.
Yeah, I just think Mexican music means music made by Mexican people, and it doesn't need to, again, I think there's like that very, and I know it as a soy gringa, like I know that there's that very stereotypical sound, and I love that both your director and you are challenging what we think that sound could be, because I think, especially in America we can get so reductive with, and even not just with a Mexican sound, what a traditional Japanese sound is or what a traditional this sound is. So I love hearing how y'all honored like the idea of something while also giving it so much more depth and color and richness and authenticity. Fantastic.
Sure.
Ace, given the Lost Weekend's connection to a specific time and cultural backdrop, speaking of cultures, did you draw inspiration from the music of that era when you were creating the score?
Oh yeah, absolutely. As soon as I heard that this project is happening, I couldn't believe it. I still kind of pinch myself a little bit, but it's a Beatles project, so it's been on my list for many, many years to really go and really dig into the discography. So I 100% did that. I basically lived into their discography for about half a year. And but
Amazing.
also tons of other music, Elton John's music, Alice Cooper, the Stones, just and also inside the film there's a lot of period. Half of the score maybe is just rock and roll. So we have a lot of guitars, a lot of. I had to check specific records even to sort of find new production techniques, how to process the drums for specific earlier 60s thing. The film takes place in the early 70s, so a lot of that was also like early 70s, like because the 60s was such an explosion of technology, right? Kind of technology, the way we recorded instruments and the way we production kind of like evolved so much in the late 60s and 70s. So I spent a lot of time listening to techniques that they used, producers of David Bowie used, and Elton John, and on all the Lennon records, like after the Beatles and the Beatles as well. So yeah, it was just a huge sort of, this was a big, big part. And also, of course, we had orchestra as well. So this was kind of a little bit more standard. But we also had a bunch of really interesting sort of sound design. So we played around with kind of, a lot of it came from guitars actually. But my dear friend Ivan Shopov, who's just super talented, we did a lot of sound design together, sort of, and synth design. But a lot of it came from EBOs, guitars and EBOs. We were EBO a guitar and then process it with weird stuff. But then, yeah, of course, all the period stuff was definitely there. The late 60s, early 70s vibe. Honestly, sometimes listening back to the soundtrack, because we're releasing it now this Friday, it's coming out two albums. One album divided into two different volumes. One would be sort of more underscore orchestral, and the second is more like rock and roll. And so like I obtained. So I realized sometimes I because when I write, I play all the guitars and like roll the riffs. I sometimes go into the 80s even. You could recognize some Metallica kind of or Megadeth influence stuff, but just like a slight, not too like on the nose. So, but yeah, totally, it's all very rooted in the early 70s, late 60s, like rock and roll sound, which was so much fun to do because I love that kind of music. So, yeah.
Was
It was
it
fun.
intimidating? Because I also, I mean, I know this is not a very controversial opinion. I love Elton John and the Beatles, but what I like, I'd be so excited, but then being like, I hope I don't mess it up. Like, I
It was
hope I don't make
incredibly,
John Lennon's ghost mad.
it was incredibly intimidating. At one point, a cue has to like seg you into Imagine, which is like what?
Like,
It was like so like it was incredibly intimidating, but also just so inspiring and humbling, which kind of like took like I think the bigger part, honestly. Like so, yeah. At the end of the day, it just was like this is what's happening, and we're doing this, and everyone was so on board. It was so supportive. The team of directors, Richard Kaufman and Eve Bronstein and Crystal Curry, everybody on the team was just so like amazing. So yeah, they were like, "You're doing great. Just keep it up." But yeah, I'm still honestly, it's been 2 years now, kind of pinching myself a little bit. Did this really happen? I guess it did. Yeah, but yeah,
Me too.
but a lot of it was just listening to the records, and because you don't want to really like sound like the records too much. But because I love and I love them so much, so I did a lot of listening to the records, but then whenever it comes time to write cues, we have themes, of course, but then and the themes would go into the period stuff too. But then just like let go and just write.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do your
And
homework and then
so yeah,
forget it.
exactly. Forget it and just be in the zone. And then look what does the scene need? What does the
Yeah.
dynamic arc of the movie need? What does the story need? And just serve the story and don't get too hung up. Yeah.
Amazing.
That's
Another
my
great,
formula.
and love it. Another great story insight. And I know we'll probably get another brilliant insight from Lucas when I ask that the performance delves deeply into Harold, our lead character's psychology. So, how did you use music to externalize and kind of make tangible his motivations and fears and internal struggles so the audience can be on that journey with him?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge for our score was to find the balance, and it was had to be very precise. So with the contrary to the dance part, which was very big and there was many fireworks, the score was very intimate. And every note counted, it seemed like. So we spent a lot of time trying to figure it out. And then, of course, there was like so many layers to the story that we were trying to also portray it. So that's challenging to have like several meanings and try to cover it with the music. Often we found ourselves to have to use the music that was actually doing something contrary to what you would expect to have for this scene. So yeah, that's something that really is very effective, and I love when it's happening.
One scene that comes to mind that I love too is when they're performing for, I won't say who exactly because it's a big reveal in the film, but when they have their first big performance, shall we say, and there's a sense of, I think y'all in the performance of the actors, but also in the music, that sense of dread that mounts and kind of like it's like so great because you think they're pulling it off, and then there's that realization that they are in way over their heads. It was so like effective and terrifying.
Yes, exactly. So there's this scene where it's a very dramatic moment. The editing is very fast, and there's like the stakes are so high, and at the same time, music actually plays against it and plays kind of creates the vibe that gives heart and hope to the scene, which is something totally unexpected, and yet it really elevates the scene. So yeah, those kind of moments where those happens, it's just magic, it's how it gets together.
Amazing. Now,
Yeah.
Joy, the WondLa universe, unlike the performance, is filled with diverse alien tribes. So not exactly Germany 1937. Can you share how you use different instrumentation to represent these tribes and create, distinct musical identities for each, which, again, no small task.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, that was my favorite part of the process, really, because Tony DiTerlizzi created such a big universe. There's so many different characters and different alien tribes, and that was something we spoke about with the filmmakers early on, like how do we use the score and the themes to represent each tribe's distinctive characteristics. So there was with all the concept art that I've seen, I got to talk to the production and character designers, like which culture did you guys or countries did you guys inspired by, and then go from there. I kind of tailored my instrumentation from that. There's like a fisherman village called Lacus, and it's on family and community. So I was thinking, oh, maybe I can use some African instruments like the balan or kalimba, balafon, or some like very earthy Amazonian percussion to kind of just add that very grounded and earthy tone to their theme. So whenever that comes up, you're like, oh, okay, we're in Lacus. Or when or a character travels to Solace, which is like a more advanced kingdom, I was like, okay, maybe we can use some Korean plucky instruments like gayangum or Chinese liuqing or dani, or add some like Mongolian choir. Like it's just like such a unique opportunity to experiment with different instrumentation to make something unique. And I was very fortunate that the team was so open to all these ideas. And as long as I had intention of what I want the each instrument to represent and what characteristics that I want to bring out, the filmmakers got really excited and very inspired. So all of this is just kind of me trying to create something that's unique to each tribe and each character. Like we also had like the antagonist was like a hunter, a big hunter, and I was like, okay, maybe we can use some synths, use a Chinese erhu, but add like a bunch of distortion and pitch bend and synths to kind of have that low growly sound. So all of these things is just because I was really lucky to have that year to experiment. And we were able to come up with that. So that was something that I was gets me the most excited about the score.
Yes. Yes. I think also the experiment and research and trying part of the process is it's my favorite part of the process, because like no decisions have to be made yet. So I think you're underscoring really beautifully why artists need time to play and experiment and try and then fall on their face and then try again. Because like, look what comes of it. Like I felt like I went on a whole tour of WondLa's universe just in you describing the different tribes, or a couple of the different tribes.
Yeah, there's so many. There's even more things. And what Stuart was saying before, like the research is so important. Like I didn't know to use these instruments till there was like a African percussion store near my place called Homeland Music. And when I went there, there was like a drum circle of people just playing instruments. And I was able to talk to these musicians, like, what is this? What is that? And they were telling me, oh, this instrument is like the Africans use this to like do bird calling or speak to the forest, stuff like that. And I was like, oh, this is fascinating. And I would just like make note of that to add into it. So research is important.
Yeah, and absorbing it. And yeah, that's awesome. Scott, we're keeping on the topic of instrumentation. Did you experiment with any unique instrument sounds or techniques to give Ultraman Rising its very also distinctive musical identity?
Yeah, so I mentioned, the two harp techniques that would sort of shift between these two modalities. And one of the themes I'm hearing, and I definitely faced with Ultraman and on every project, is this idea of all these research-driven, clever ideas that you inevitably, like in at least in my experience, most of them don't work. It's usually like the just basic stuff, right? So there were really only a few clever things I did that I thought worked really well. I guess one of them was they wanted an 8-bit sound. So I used one of these where you can actually sort of engineer it to be a playable synthesizer. I did that with a Commodore 64 as well. We used something called a Vocaloid, which is a Japanese vocal synthesizer, to create Emmy's voice. And I had her theme be around, sort of like Frere Jacques or Row Your Boat. I just thought there was something about that, a Vocaloid in a round for a creature that wasn't just incredibly cute, but that you felt really proud of her. So I thought of like how we feel when we're at a child's recital or something, and just the idea of this really innocent, beautifully cute round that she sings with herself. That then as she gets older, that round turns into a full-on fugue where I jump into the stretto section of a fugue as she's running loose in the city of Tokyo. That was sort of a clever idea that actually worked, whereas all the other clever ideas were just garbage. They just didn't emotionally support the story. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. All these things that you throw away. You know, you have to go through that messy process. I was also really lucky to work with Kaoru Watanabe, this amazing composer in his own right and Japanese percussionist and flautist who wrote the score for Isle of Dogs. He arranged a recording session with Japanese percussionists in Tokyo, and allowing them the freedom to improvise and bring ideas of their own, which was the real way, rather than me telling them exactly what to play. If you want authenticity, bring human beings in and allow them executive creative control over some of the aspects of what they're playing. So we spent the whole first half of the session playing what I wanted, and then the next half was just them improvising. And we ended up using some of the sound effects created by rubbing a thumb around a taiko drum as Ken, our hero, is drowning. We hear that as the sound effects. So you're sort of inside a taiko drum drowning in the scene. So it was just I had 4 years on Ultraman, thanks mostly to the pandemic. So there
Thanks,
was just a
COVID.
ridiculous amount of instrumental experimentation and freedom to. I did not want to appropriate anything culturally. I didn't want to be an ethnomusicologist. I wanted to deliver a
Right.
great score, but sometimes when you try that, shifting one note to bring something into a Japanese scale, it's not that you've made it more Japanese. You've just accessed a more a different type of emotion, a different type of tonality that just worked with Onda as this very. He's not major, he's not minor, he's something else that's more complex. So yeah, a lot of experimentation, a lot on the cutting room floor, and the stuff that made it was just the stuff that worked that you can't even really explain.
Yes. And that's where, again, the magic and the humanness is. But no, I feel you. I got notes recently and I'm like, okay, these are all great ideas, but me and my collaborator are the ones who actually have to implement them. So it's like, how are we gonna, again, beautiful ideas, but like which ones are gonna be the ones that actually work and again serve the story as you all have so eloquently and brilliantly spoken to. The word that keeps coming into my head after speaking with y'all is brilliant. Um, and so, unfortunately, much to my chagrin, personal chagrin, I think that's all the time we have today. I'm devastated because I feel like I could talk to y'all individually and collectively for hours. I want to thank all of our amazing panelists, Ace, Joy, Lucas, Scott, Stuart, and Tomás, for being here with us today to discuss their incredible music and share their brilliant insights. And I also want to thank Impact 24 PR for putting this panel together and providing this platform. And of course, to all of you for watching. And we'll see you next time.